The day Tarla Wolfsbane walked down from the mountain pass with nothing but a torn cloak and bleeding feet. Garrett Holloway had been mending the split-rail fence that bordered his wheat field and wondering if loneliness was something a man could eventually get used to. He looked up from his work to see her stumbling along the dirt road, her green skin catching the afternoon light like polished jade, and his first thought was not fear but recognition of someone who had been cast out just as thoroughly as he had. Most men would have run for their hunting bows. Orcs did not travel alone through human lands unless they were scouts for war parties, or so the stories went. But Garrett had lived on the frontier long enough to know that stories were just comfortable lies people told themselves to avoid complicated truths. He set down his hammer and watched her collapse 20 yards from his property line, her powerful frame folding in on itself like a building losing its foundation. He approached cautiously, not because he feared violence, but because he knew what it felt like to be vulnerable and have someone tower over you with intentions you could not raid. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 20 summers at most, with small tusks that curved upward from her lower jaw and pointed ears that lay flat against her skull in what he suspected was either pain or shame. Her face would have been lovely by any measure, with high cheekbones and large amber eyes, except for the purple bruises that mottled her left temple and the split in her lower lip that still wept fresh blood. "I mean you no harm," he said quietly, staying several feet away. "But you are hurt. Will you let me help you?" She flinched at his voice, and her eyes snapped open with the wild alertness of prey animals. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, and he could see her calculating distances and escape routes despite her obvious exhaustion. Then her gaze moved past him to the small farmhouse with its neat garden and the barn where his 2 dairy cows lowed softly in their stalls, and something in her expression crumbled. "Why?" Her voice was rough, as though she had been screaming or had not spoken in days. "Why would you help me?" "Because you need it," Garrett said simply. "And because I have bandages and water and a place for you to rest that is not the side of the road. That is all I am offering, nothing more unless you want it." She searched his face for the lie, the hidden cruelty, the trap. He let her look, keeping his hands visible and his posture open. He was not an impressive man by frontier standards, lean rather than broad, with brown hair that fell into his eyes and a scholar's hands that had learned farming through necessity rather than birthright. The war had made him a veteran, but peace had made him a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone with his books and his fields. "My name is Tarla," she said finally. "My clan sent me away because they said my face would bring ruin. That human men would see me and want to possess me, and that our warriors would die defending something that should not exist." Garrett felt anger kindle in his chest, not at her, but at the brutal practicality of people who would throw away one of their own for the crime of being beautiful. "My name is Garrett Holloway. I was an officer in the Borderlands campaign until I told my superiors that burning orc villages full of civilians was murder, not war. They cashiered me out and made sure no one in the settled lands would hire me. So I came here, where people are too busy surviving to care about my opinions." Something shifted in her eyes, a recognition that matched his own from moments before. She reached up slowly, and he took her hand and helped her to her feet. She swayed against him, and he caught her with an arm around her waist, startled by the heat of her skin through the thin fabric of her tunic, and the solid strength of her, even in weakness. He got her inside and settled on the narrow bed in the corner of the main room, the same bed where he slept each night and stared at the ceiling wondering what his life had become. She did not protest when he brought water and clean cloth, did not pull away when he carefully cleaned the cut on her lip and the scrapes on her feet. Her amber eyes followed his movements with unwavering attention, as though she was memorizing each gesture against some future betrayal. "When did you last eat?" he asked, and her silence was answer enough. He built up the fire in the hearth and put together a meal of bread and cheese and the vegetable stew he had made 2 days prior, not fancy but substantial. She ate slowly at first, then with the desperate focus of genuine hunger, and he pretended not to notice the way her hands shook or the tears that slid down her green cheeks and into her bowl. That night he gave her the bed and made himself a pallet on the floor near the hearth, and when she protested, he simply said that guests deserved comfort and that he had slept in worse places. He did not mention that he would not sleep much anyway, not with another person in the house after months of solitude, not with the sound of her breathing reminding him that he was not the only exile in the world. The first week passed in careful silence. Tarla's feet healed, and the bruises on her face faded from purple to green to yellow. She watched him work with the intensity of someone trying to understand a foreign language, and gradually she began to help without being asked. She was stronger than him by a considerable margin, and tasks that took him an hour of hard labor she completed in minutes. The fence he had been mending was finished in an afternoon. The firewood he had been meaning to split for winter became a neatly stacked cord in a single morning. "You do not have to earn your place here," he told her on the 8th day, watching her pull weeds from the garden with methodical precision. "You can stay as long as you need to, whether you work or not." She sat back on her heels and looked at him with those unreadable amber eyes. "In my clan, everyone contributes. Those who do not are burdens, and burdens are cast out. I will not be cast out again." "This is not your clan," Garrett said gently, "and I am not going to cast you out for resting when you need to rest." "Then what will you cast me out for?" The question came with surprising sharpness, as though she was trying to identify the boundaries of his tolerance before she accidentally crossed them. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have never had to think about it before. But I suspect it would take something quite terrible, and you do not seem like someone inclined toward terrible things." She looked away, but not before he saw something fragile and desperate flicker across her face. "My clan said my beauty was a terrible thing. That it would make human men into monsters and orc men into fools. They said I was a weapon that would fire in the wrong direction." Garrett chose his words with care, aware that he was navigating territory that could shatter the fragile trust between them. "You are lovely, yes. But loveliness is not a crime, and it does not make you responsible for other people's monstrousness or foolishness. If a man cannot control himself around a beautiful woman, that is his failure, not hers. Human men do not usually think that way about orc women," Tarla said quietly. "They think we are ugly, brutal, good for fighting or working but not for looking at." "Then human men are not usually paying attention," Garrett said, and then flushed when he realized how that sounded. "I mean, you are not ugly, obviously. Anyone with eyes could see that." For the first time since she had arrived, Tarla smiled, just a small curve of her lips that made her tusks catch the light. "You are terrible at talking to women." "Catastrophically bad," he agreed, relieved that she was laughing at him rather than offended. "I was better at it before the war, but I think I left that skill somewhere in the mud outside Fort Greymark. What were you before the war?" She asked it with genuine curiosity, and he realized that they had been living in the same small house for over a week and had barely spoken about anything except immediate practical needs. "A teacher," he said, and felt the old grief settle around him like a familiar coat. "History and literature at a small academy in the southern provinces. Then the conscription notices came, and they needed officers who could read maps and write reports, and I thought I could do more good serving than running. I was wrong about that. Why? Tarla had abandoned the garden entirely now, sitting cross-legged in the dirt with her full attention on him. Because I thought war was about strategy and necessity, and I learned it was mostly about cruelty and power. Because I thought honorable men led armies, and I learned that honorable men do not usually rise to leadership during desperate times. Because I watched villages burn and told myself it was for the greater good until the day I could not lie to myself anymore. He stopped, surprised by his own honesty. He had not spoken this much about the war to anyone, not even during his court-martial. Tarla was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was soft. My clan said I was being sent away for the good of everyone. That my absence would prevent conflict and keep us safe. They said it was necessary, even though it meant I would probably die alone in the wilderness. I think people use necessity and greater good when they want to do cruel things without feeling guilty. Yes, Garrett said. Yes, I think you are right about that. Something shifted between them that day, a door opening onto a room where they could speak honestly without performing strength or indifference. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt less like host and guest and more like partners building something neither had quite named yet. Tarla's knowledge of plants and wilderness survival complemented his book learning about agriculture and animal husbandry. She taught him which mushrooms were edible and which would kill him in fascinating ways. He taught her to read, laboriously working through the alphabet with charcoal on smooth pieces of wood, and felt absurd pride when she wrote her own name for the first time. The harvest came, and they worked side by side cutting wheat and bundling it for storage. Tarla could work longer hours than him without tiring, but she had learned to stop and rest when he needed to, sitting in the shade of the barn and drinking water while he caught his breath. He had never been particularly strong, and months of farming had built lean muscle but not the endurance of someone born to physical labor. She never mocked him for it, never showed impatience with his limitations, and that restraint felt like a gift. "Why do you live alone?" she asked one evening as they prepared dinner together, her hands slicing vegetables with the precise efficiency she brought to every physical task, while he tended the bread baking in the hearth. "Because I am not good at being around large groups of people anymore," he said honestly. "After the war, I found I could not tolerate the noise and the constant performance of normalcy. Everyone wanted me to pretend nothing had changed, that I had not seen what I had seen. Out here, I do not have to pretend. Are you pretending with me?" The vulnerability in her question made him turn to look at her fully. "No," he said. "I am not pretending with you. I think that is why this works. We are both too tired to lie about who we are." She smiled again, that small expression he had learned to treasure because she did not give it away easily. "I like that, being too tired to lie." The first frost came in late autumn, and with it came the merchant caravan that passed through once per season on the way to the fortress towns further north. Garrett normally traded grain and vegetables for things he could not produce himself: salt, sugar, needles, lamp oil. This year he hesitated, aware that bringing Tarla into contact with other humans could shatter the peace they had built. "You should go," she said, reading his thoughts with the accuracy she had developed over months of close proximity. "You need supplies for winter." "I will stay here and keep the house warm." "You could come with me," he suggested, even though he knew what her answer would be. "And give the merchants a story to tell in every town between here and the northern sea. The freak orc woman living with the disgraced human soldier." She shook her head. "I am not ashamed of being here with you, Garrett, but I do not want to make your life harder than it already is." He wanted to argue, to tell her that he did not care what stories the merchants told, but the truth was more complicated. He had found something like peace in his exile, and the thought of inviting scrutiny made his chest tight with anxiety. So he went alone, walking the 2 hours to the crossroads where the caravan camped, and tried not to feel like he was betraying her by hiding her existence. The trading went smoothly until he ran into Marcus Hendrick, another veteran who had settled in the region, and who possessed the kind of aggressive friendliness that Garrett found exhausting. Marcus insisted on sharing a flask of whiskey and asking pointed questions about how Garrett was managing alone, whether he had found himself a woman yet, whether the loneliness was driving him mad. "There are widows in Crestfall who would take you if you asked," Marcus said, slapping him on the back hard enough to hurt. "Strong women who know how to work a farm. You are too young to live like a hermit." "I am managing fine," Garrett said, trying to extract himself from the conversation without causing offense. "I prefer the quiet. Quiet is one thing, isolation is another." Marcus leaned in, and Garrett smelled the whiskey heavy on his breath. "A man needs a woman, Holloway. Needs someone to warm his bed and give him sons. You cannot let what happened during the war ruin you for normal life." Garrett thought about Tarla's laugh when he made a mistake while reading, about the way she hummed while cooking, about the comfortable silence they shared in the evenings when they were both too tired to talk. He thought about how she had looked that morning, standing in the doorway with the sunrise turning her green skin to gold, telling him to be safe on the road. "I will keep that in mind," he said, and escaped as soon as he could manage it. He walked home through the gathering dusk, his pack heavy with supplies, and found the house glowing with lamplight and warmth. Tarla had made dinner, something elaborate with the last of the fresh vegetables from the garden, and she had clearly spent time on it. She had even set the table with the good plates he never used, the ones he had brought from his old life and kept out of sentiment rather than practicality. "Did something happen?" he asked, confused by the effort. She looked embarrassed, her green skin darkening in what he had learned was an orc blush. "I thought you might like coming home to something nice, after being around other people and having to hide that I exist." The guilt he had carried home intensified into something sharper. He set down his pack and crossed the room to stand in front of her, looking up slightly because she was taller than him by several inches. "I was not hiding you because I am ashamed. I was hiding you because I am afraid of losing this, of losing you. You think the merchants would drive me away." She tried to sound unconcerned, but he heard the fear underneath. "I think people fear what they do not understand, and they destroy what they fear. I think they would see you as a threat or a prize, and either way they would not leave us in peace." He took a breath, aware that he was stepping over a line they had both been carefully avoiding. "And I want to be left in peace with you, Tarla. I want this life we are building. I want to come home to you and eat dinners you spent too much time preparing. I want to teach you more words and have you mock me for my terrible farming. I want mornings and evenings and all the quiet hours in between." She stared at him, her amber eyes wide and shining in the lamplight. "Garrett, I am an orc. You are human. There is no future where this ends well. I have already lost my career, my reputation, and my place in civilized society," he said. "I have nothing left to lose except this farm and my integrity. And my integrity tells me that you are the best thing that has happened to me since before the war, and I am not going to throw that away because other people think it is wrong." "What are you saying?" Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. He reached up and took her hands, feeling the rough calluses from work and the strength in her fingers. "I am saying that I love you, that I have loved you for weeks and been too afraid to say it because I did not want to make you feel obligated or trapped. But I am tired of being afraid, and I am tired of pretending I do not feel what I feel. So I am telling you, I love you, Tarla Wolfsbane. She made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and then she was pulling him close, tucking his head against her shoulder and holding him with a careful tenderness that acknowledged their difference in strength. "I love you too," she said into his hair. "I have loved you since you cleaned my wounds and did not flinch away from me, since you gave me your bed and taught me letters and treated me like I was worth something. I love you so much it terrifies me." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the warm kitchen while the dinner cooled on the table. When they finally pulled apart, Garrett reached up and cupped her face in his hands, tracing the line of her tusks with his thumbs. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she said, and bent down to meet him. Her tusks made the angle awkward, but they figured it out, adjusting until their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and searching and full of months of unspoken longing. She tasted like the herbs she had been cooking with, and her skin was fever warm under his hands, and Garrett felt something in his chest that had been clenched tight since the war finally began to relax. They ate dinner eventually, though the food was cold and neither of them cared. They talked late into the night, confessing feelings and fears and hopes they had kept locked away. Tarla told him about the moment she knew she loved him, when he had fallen asleep at the table over a book, and she had covered him with a blanket and felt her heart break at his vulnerability. Garrett told her about watching her sing to the cows one morning and realizing he wanted to hear that sound every day for the rest of his life. When they finally went to bed, Tarla pulled the pallet up next to the bed frame, but Garrett shook his head. "That is foolish. The bed is big enough for two if we are friendly about it, and I think we are well past pretending we do not want to be close to each other." So they shared the bed, curled together with Tarla's arm around his waist and Garrett's head on her shoulder, and Garrett slept better than he had in years. Winter came with heavy snows that buried the farm in white silence. They spent the long dark months working on projects inside, with Garrett continuing to teach Tarla to read using his small library of books. She learned quickly, her sharp mind devouring knowledge with the same intensity she brought to everything else. In return, she taught him the fighting techniques of her clan, insisting that he needed to know how to defend himself properly. "I am not going to fight anyone," he protested after she had put him on his back for the 5th time in an hour. "You might have to fight to defend me," she said seriously. "If people come who want to take me away or hurt me because of what I am. I need to know you can protect yourself while I am protecting you." So he learned, slowly and with great difficulty, because his body was not built for the kind of combat she was teaching. But she was patient with him, and he got better. And more importantly, he learned to fall without injuring himself, which seemed like a valuable life skill regardless of future combat prospects. They celebrated the winter solstice together with a feast of roasted chicken and root vegetables, and Garrett gave her a book he had copied out by hand, filling the pages with her favorite stories he had told her from memory. She gave him a new shirt she had sewn from fabric she had woven herself from the flax in his field, the stitching so precise, and even that it looked like something from a professional tailor. "When did you have time to make this?" he asked, amazed. "While you were sleeping," she said, looking pleased with his reaction. "I wanted to give you something that showed how much I value being here, how much I value you." He kissed her then, pulling her down to sit beside him on the bed, and the kiss turned into a slow exploration that ended with them tangled together under the heavy quilts, learning the contours of each other's bodies with the focused attention they brought to all their shared discoveries. Being together felt like the most natural thing in the world. Two people who fit together, despite all the reasons they should not, building intimacy one careful touch at a time. Spring arrived with a messenger. Garrett was working on repairing the plow, his hands black with grease and his attention focused on a particularly stubborn bolt, when he heard horses on the road. Tarla was in the back clearing brush from the irrigation ditches, far enough away that she would not hear visitors arriving. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, and watched 3 riders approach. They wore the green and silver of the Borderland Rangers, the military force that patrolled the frontier between human and orc territories. The lead rider was a woman with iron-gray hair and a scar across her left cheek, and she looked at Garrett with the flat assessment of someone who made judgments quickly and rarely changed them. "Garrett Holloway?" she asked. "Yes." He did not move from where he stood, blocking the path to the house and the barn and, more importantly, to Tarla working in the back field. "I am Captain Linda Morrison, Borderland Rangers. We received reports of an orc woman traveling alone through this region last autumn. Have you seen anyone matching that description?" Garrett's mind raced through possible responses, weighing honesty against protection, measuring the odds that lying would be successful against the certainty that lying would make things worse if discovered. "Why are you looking for her?" "That is not an answer to my question," Captain Morrison said, but her voice was not unkind. "However, I will tell you that we are not hunting her. Her clan contacted the Rangers through diplomatic channels. Apparently there has been a change in leadership, and the new chieftain wants her found and brought home safely. They have admitted that exiling her was wrong and wish to make amends." "How convenient for them," Garrett said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "They throw her out to die and then decide they made a mistake once she is gone." Captain Morrison's expression shifted slightly, acknowledging the point. "So you have seen her. Is she here?" Before Garrett could answer, Tarla emerged from around the side of the barn, her work clothes muddy and her hair tied back in a practical braid. She had heard the horses after all, or perhaps had seen them from the field. She walked to stand beside Garrett, not behind him, her posture straight and her chin lifted. "I am here," she said, "and I am not going back." Captain Morrison dismounted and her 2 companions followed suit. Up close, Garrett could see she was older than he had first thought, with the kind of weathered competence that came from decades on the frontier. She looked at Tarla for a long moment, then at Garrett, then at the farm around them with its obvious signs of 2 people working together. "You are living here," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Tarla said. "Garrett took me in when I was dying. He gave me shelter and kindness and asked for nothing in return. This is my home now." "And you do not wish to return to your clan, even though they are asking for you to come back?" Captain Morrison asked. "They did not want me when I had nowhere else to go," Tarla said quietly. "They do not get to want me now that I have built a life that makes me happy. I am grateful they realized their mistake, but the answer is no." Captain Morrison nodded slowly, then turned her attention to Garrett. "And you, Mr. Holloway, you understand that harboring an orc could be seen as suspicious. That there are people who would assume you are using her for labor or worse. I understand that people make assumptions based on their own limited understanding of the world," Garrett said, choosing his words carefully. "I also understand that Tarla is a free woman who can make her own choices about where she lives and who she lives with. We are partners, Captain, in work and in life. And unless there is some law I am unaware of that forbids that, I do not see how our arrangement is the business of the Borderland Rangers." Something that might have been approval flickered across Captain Morrison's scarred face. "There is no law against it, though there are certainly people who would prefer one existed. However, I am required to file a report confirming that the orc woman in question is alive and well and living of her own free will. May I speak with you separately, Miss Wolfsbane, to confirm that?" Tarla glanced at Garrett, and he nodded. She walked a short distance away with the captain, far enough that he could not hear their conversation but close enough that he could intervene if needed. He watched them talk, saw Tarla's animated gestures and Captain Morrison's focused attention, and tried not to imagine all the ways this could still go wrong. After several minutes, they returned together. Captain Morrison looked thoughtful, and Tarla looked nervous but determined. "I am satisfied that Miss Wolfsbane is here voluntarily and is being treated well," Captain Morrison said formally. "I will report back to her clan that she has declined their offer to return and is living peacefully in human lands. That should close the matter officially." She paused, then continued in a less formal tone. "Unofficially, I will tell you both that the frontier is changing. There are more mixed communities now, more trade between humans and orcs, more marriages and partnerships across species lines. You are not as alone in this as you might think. But there is still danger, still prejudice from people who do not want things to change. Be careful, watch out for each other." "We will," Garrett said. "Thank you, Captain." "Do not thank me for doing the bare minimum of treating people with dignity," she said, but there was warmth in her voice. She and her companions mounted and rode away, disappearing down the road toward the north. Tarla turned to Garrett, and he could see tears tracking down her green cheeks. She said, "I deserve to be happy. That anyone with eyes could see we love each other, and that love was too rare to throw away for the sake of tradition or prejudice." Garrett pulled her close, holding her while she cried with what he thought might be relief or joy, or simply the release of months of tension. "She was right," he said into her hair. "You do deserve to be happy, we both do." "I was so afraid they would make me leave," she whispered, "that they would find some law or reason to separate us." "I would not have let them take you," Garrett said fiercely. "I would have fought, even though I am terrible at fighting. I would have followed you wherever they sent you. I'm not losing you, Tarla. Not to your clan, not to the Rangers, not to anyone." She pulled back enough to look at him, her amber eyes still wet but shining with emotion. "I want to marry you. I know that is probably not possible or legal or whatever humans require, but I do not care. I want to be bound to you in whatever way we can manage." Garrett felt his heart expand with a joy so intense it was almost painful. "Captain Morrison said there are partnerships across species lines now. That means there must be some kind of legal or social framework for it. We will figure it out, and if we cannot do it legally, then we will do it our own way. I am already yours, Tarla, have been since the day you agreed to stay." "Then I am yours," she said, smiling through her tears, "for as long as you will have me." "Forever seems like a good starting point," he said, and kissed her while the spring sunshine warmed the earth around them and the future stretched ahead, uncertain but bright with possibility. They married a month later at the crossroads, with Captain Morrison serving as witness and Marcus Hendrick standing up as Garrett's groomsman, despite his obvious confusion about the entire situation. There was no priest willing to perform the ceremony, so they wrote their own vows and spoke them in front of the gathered crowd of frontier settlers who had come out of curiosity and stayed out of respect for the obvious love between the couple. Tarla wore a dress she had made from fabric Garrett had traded for in the last merchant caravan, dyed green to match her skin, but embroidered with white flowers he had helped her stitch. Garrett wore his new shirt and a vest that Tarla had surprised him with the night before. They held hands and promised to love each other through seasons and challenges, through the judgment of others, and the inevitable difficulties of a life built on the margins of two societies. When it came time to exchange tokens, Garrett gave Tarla a ring he had commissioned from a traveling metalsmith. Silver worked with a pattern of oak leaves because she had told him once that oak trees were sacred in orc culture. Tarla gave him a ring made from a piece of her own tusk, carefully carved and polished to a soft glow, And when he protested that she had hurt herself to make it, she laughed and told him that tusks grew back, and that she wanted him to carry a piece of her always. They kissed in front of everyone, and there was applause mixed with a few scandalized mutters, but Garrett did not care about the mutters because he was too busy holding his wife and thinking that he had been wrong about loneliness. It was not something you got used to. It was something you endured until you found the person who made you remember what it felt like to be whole. The celebration afterward was modest but genuine, with food and drink provided by neighbors who had learned that Tarla was an excellent farmer and a generous friend. Marcus Hendrick got drunk and gave a rambling speech about how love was strange and sometimes confusing, but always worth celebrating. Captain Morrison told stories about other mixed couples she had met on the frontier, offering proof that Garrett and Tarla were not as unprecedented as they felt. As the sun set, Garrett and Tarla walked home together, hand in hand, their rings catching the last light of the day. The farm looked beautiful in the dusk, the fields ready for planting, the house solid and welcoming. It was not a grand life by any measure, but it was theirs, built through work and trust, and the kind of love that survived exile and prejudice, and the simple difficulty of learning to live with another person. "Are you happy?" Tarla asked as they stood in the doorway, looking out at the land they had cultivated together. "Happier than I have ever been," Garrett said honestly. "Happier than I thought I could be." "Good," she said, and pulled him inside, closing the door on the rest of the world. "Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They spent their wedding night talking and laughing and celebrating their union in all the ways that mattered. And when Garrett finally fell asleep with Tarla curled around him like a shield against all the darkness in the world, his last thought was that he had been cast out of one life only to find a better one waiting in the ruins. That sometimes the worst thing that could happen to you was actually the push you needed to find where you truly belonged. The years that followed were not always easy. There were bad harvests and lean winters. There were incidents with travelers who saw Tarla and reacted with fear or aggression. There were moments when the weight of being different felt too heavy to carry, when the isolation pressed down and made them question whether love was enough to sustain a life on the margins. But there were also good years, abundant harvests, expansion of the farm to include a small orchard and a larger herd of animals. There were friendships with other mixed couples who settled in the region, forming a small community of exiles and outcasts who built something new together. There were visits from Captain Morrison, who had apparently appointed herself an unofficial guardian of frontier integration efforts. There were children eventually, 2 daughters and a son who inherited their mother's strength and their father's thoughtfulness, and who grew up knowing that love was not limited by the color of one's skin or the shape of one's teeth. On their 10th anniversary, Garrett and Tarla stood in the same spot where he had first seen her collapse on the road, now marked by an oak tree they had planted to commemorate their meeting. The tree had grown strong and tall, its roots deep in the soil of the frontier, its branches spreading wide enough to shade them both. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked, voicing a fear he had carried quietly for years. "Staying here instead of going home when you had the chance?" Tarla looked at him with those amber eyes that still made his heart skip, even after a decade of seeing them across the breakfast table every morning. "I am home," she said simply. "I have been home since the day you offered me water and kindness and asked for nothing in return. This is where I belong, Garrett. With you, with our children, with this life we built from nothing. I have never regretted it. Not once." He kissed her then, under the oak tree they had planted together, and felt the same joy he had felt on their wedding day. Love, he had learned, was not about perfection or ease. It was about finding someone worth fighting for, worth changing for, worth building a life with even when the world said it was impossible. And as he held his wife and heard his children laughing in the distance and felt the solid earth of his farm beneath his feet, Garrett Holloway knew that he had found exactly that. That the lonely man mending fences and wondering about his purpose had become someone else entirely, someone whole and happy and home. The clan had feared Tarla's beauty and driven her out, seeing only danger in her difference. But Garrett had looked past the surface to find the gentle soul within, and in doing so, had saved them both from lives of isolation and regret. It was not a grand story by the standards of epics and legends. There were no dragons slain or kingdoms saved. But it was their story, true and hard-won and full of the kind of love that changed everything. And in the end, that was enough.